Lance and Steven in the morning.
Nights.
Oh, I laugh every time.
I can't help but laugh. Oh, man. So good.
Well, good evening. Welcome to Lance and Steven in the Morning Nights edition.
Nights.
Yeah, where we bring our whatever you would call what we do to your evening and to talk about something more serious than whatever it is we talk about Thursday mornings.
I was expecting you to have your bathrobe tonight, Lance.
Oh, no, I forgot.
I don't have one, so this is the closest I could get, is making it look like.
If we have truly adoring fans, they will get us custom Lance and Steven in the morning bathrobes. We'll wear them. We'll do more evening shows and wear them.
And we'll wear them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hello to all of you that are watching, and to those of you who will be watching later at some point, I'm sure. We're here. I'm Lance, and got Steve with me, and we're going to chat about some stuff. So, Steve, why don't you tell us what that's going to be tonight?
I have no idea where this is going to go, Lance. Like I had said earlier, we were gonna set out with a direction in mind and hopefully get there. I guess a lot of this is birthed out of discussions that we have been having, and so we intentionally wanted to keep our morning show light and lighthearted and just a breath of fresh air in the midst of sometimes a difficult season. Which is why we're doing this night show. And the topic we want to deal with tonight is dealing with some of the division and the divisiveness and the polarization that we see happening in our society, in our churches, among fellow believers, and what we're called to, I guess, as the church, and trying to, I guess, bring our pastoral insight, a little bit of Bible, a little bit of open discussion around some of these things. How do we have these conversations? In light of what we're experiencing. Sometimes it's hard to feel like these conversations can be hard when we find it we're on differing opinions from people. So, yeah.
No, and it's not light subject matter. Like it's division over the idea of what's happening to us in reality right now, and it's affecting people's lives and livelihoods and how we gather as churches. And so I guess part of the context is it raises the question of how ought we as Christians to both perceive what's going on in Canada and Alberta for sure, which is our context, and do we perceive COVID as a legitimate issue or not? Do we perceive what the government's response to it as legitimate and warranted or not, as effective or not? And as Christians, should we, follow the restrictions, or should we protest the infringement of our right to gather and worship? This is kind of just the context, and especially when you have pastors, a few pastors now have been arrested even for breaking Alberta health restrictions. It kind of, the ante is high. I'll put it that way. This isn't something people typically feel dispassionate about. Whatever side of the issue you take. So just a disclaimer for you guys watching, and those of you watching later, like we're just two dudes, pastors, and I mean, like Steve said, that's why we're talking, is to try and add our voice to the mix as spiritual leaders, I guess. But man, we're not experts, and we're not here trying to push our opinions either. We're just more creating a space where we can try to talk about these things, and I guess so you can reflect on some of what we're feeling and thinking as we study the scriptures and study the times. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to start with that disclaimer.
Yeah. Well, and I think the nature of our roles and what we deal with in typical, and the air of this discussion, how we are dressed and our environments right now should speak to. We're not here with shirt and tie and going to work. We want this to feel like this is a conversation to have in your home and in your living room. And I don't want to think we're being flippant about this discussion, because we've talked a lot and thought a lot about a lot of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're not approaching it lightly, but we're approaching it intentionally, yet with our typical lighthearted approach.
Yeah.
We're not coming in with whips and chains, put it that way.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's why we wanted to kind of go to this. I mean, you're going to hear our take on the current events and how we think we ought to perceive it as a church. That's inevitably going to happen. But I mean, if you're watching and you disagree with us or agree or whatever, feel free to comment. Like, just keep it civil, but feel free to share your thoughts. Yep. We want to process those.
We want to interact.
Yeah,
that's why we're doing it in this format. If we didn't want to interact, we'd just have me and you record ourselves.
That's right. And so what we were wanting to try to focus on, though, for tonight is in the event that there is such division over whether churches should be fighting to have the right to meet and gather and worship without masks and do all these things, or whether we should just recognize COVID as a legitimate something that we have an opportunity to help the community with as we follow restrictions. Like, whatever stance you sort of take, we want to talk about how do we as followers of Jesus conduct ourselves, relate to one another in love and in unity, because that's a significant biblical concept, particularly in the New Testament. So that's kind of where we want to go, right?
It is, and I think one of my children didn't realize I'm online. I'd like to know who's online, who's watching live right now. We can't see unless you comment. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah, say hello.
My daughter is online live with us right now,
and then she left. So
yeah,
shoot us a comment and just to say hello, so we can see who's part of the conversation with us.
Or if it's just me and you in our own echo chamber.
That's right, which is just another day then. So, Steve, you got some... we got Karen Cater watching. Hello, Karen. Oh, and Janice is watching too. Rhonda's trying to listen, but also working. So,
okay.
We'll see. And Rob is watching too. Hello, Rob.
Nice.
Yeah, good to see you guys. So to speak, you know what I mean. All right, so Steve, you got some scriptures to share.
Do I?
Oh, hi, Amanda. Yeah, you said you had some.
Yeah.
So we're talking about unity. We're talking about love and grace, how we relate to one another. So here, we're going to throw some Bible at you.
Throw some Bible up. So I think the thing that spurred this for me was in Pastor Glenn's message a few weeks back, when he had talked from Galatians chapter 5. Let me see here. Yeah. So he's talking about the Spirit. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love, for the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. If you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. So I say, walk by the Spirit, you will not gratify the desires of the flesh, for the flesh desires what's contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what's contrary to the flesh. They're in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want. But if you're led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. The acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity, and debauchery, idolatry and witchcraft, which we read those and we're like, yeah, okay, sure. Like witchcraft, idolatry, sexual immorality, we get that. But it's funny because these next ones never really jumped out to me until I heard it in Glenn's sermon, yet I've read this so many times. Hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy. Wow.
Yeah, that's those are a little more relatable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so this is, I mean, what, and Glenn's question was, what have we seen this last year? And no matter, and this is, so this isn't even talking about where you land on any of these things. This is the response, or the attitudes that come out. And I've seen this on both sides of anything we can debate. I've seen it on both sides.
Yeah.
And so what's crazy is that is the deeds of the flesh at work, which is I find it incredibly disturbing that's the evidence of what we see. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Man.
Yeah.
Like, and so when I saw that really spoke to me about what we've been witnessing in society, but more disturbing. I mean, so you're going to see, as believers, you expect to see the deeds of the flesh in people who are not following Christ, but when you see it, when we're supposed to have the Spirit at work in us, and I've seen these things in my own life, and so there's an aspect where I'm sowing into the flesh in some of these regards instead of the Spirit, and it's just evidence that the Spirit needs more control in my life. And I mean, what we're seeing is division in friendships and families and churches. That concerns me more than wherever you land on this scale. Honestly, like, I mean, and I'll talk a little bit later about where I land on some of these things, because I've been very quiet lately about some of that.
Yeah.
But we talk about losing rights, or losing freedoms, or government overreach, or not being able to trust the media, or any of that stuff. Honestly, the thing that concerns me more is seeing the work of the flesh at work in us as believers, and thinking that we are doing God's work when it's the evidence of the flesh that's obvious. That scares me when I see it in me, because it's like, oh man, who am I serving?
Yeah.
I
guess it's kind of also like, even if you're right. Mary says thank you. You're welcome. Even if you're right, if the way you are going about the right cause is out of the flesh, then I don't know, is it fair to say it disqualifies it? It's certainly not good.
It definitely brings into question why, because here's the thing, the God is not just concerned about us doing the right things. He's concerned about the heart which we even do those things. The people that came to Jesus and said, Lord, Lord, we drove out demons in your name. Guess what? They did the right thing. And Jesus says, depart from me, I never knew you. Man alive.
Yeah.
That is one of the most sobering scriptures for me, that I can be doing all the things that God desires, and yet not for God. Doing it for something else. And when I see the evidence of the flesh at work, Am I doing that for God? Or am I, it's not the Spirit doing it. And so if the Spirit isn't doing it,
Yeah.
what does it amount to?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that comes around, I think, to the Jesus Sermon on the Mount as a whole. It's a passage or several passages you can find in Matthew chapter 5 through 7, and I've been studying these for a fair while over the last year, and it's been just on my heart a lot as these times have been unfolding, because it's in this Sermon on the Mount that Jesus really speaks to what it means to be a follower of Jesus, what it means to be a citizen of the kingdom of God, and I think in that you see really God's heart and what the character and conduct and way we relate to one another as people who are filled with the Spirit of God in Jesus Christ. And so if you flip over to Matthew 5, Matthew 5, 13 to 15 or 16, he talks about how we're salt and light. You're a light of the world. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. The conduct that we and the way we relate to others, it represents Jesus to the world around us. He talks about, you've heard that it was said to the people long ago, verse 21, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Right? And that goes right along with the passage you brought up, right? The deeds of the flesh, right? It goes down later. Love for enemies, verse 43. You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. And I think that's powerful, that if you want to be like God, if you want to be his child, you love the people who are opposed to you. That's what you do, because that's exactly what he does. And it goes on, if you love only those who love you, agree with you, reward you, like what reward will you get? Everyone does that. There's nothing that separates you from anyone else. But if you love even your enemy, that is what separates you from, and you can only do that by having Jesus alive in you, right?
So I just had a text message from Shannon, who's watching on YouTube. So he's off Facebook, so he can only watch on YouTube. He has a topic for discussion. He says, I may disagree with you on a point. Should I therefore hate you with an all-consuming fire? I think that's a facetious question.
Please don't.
But I think he's pointing at the thing that we're seeing is that, I mean, people have been drawing massive dividing lines over these things. So if we disagree, how do we deal with that? If we are sincerely end up on different sides of a discussion, how do we deal with that? I mean, you're bringing out the Sermon on the Mount, which Jesus strongly hints around at us that if you do anything other than love, you have missed the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jessica raises a good point here. When we, sharing truth, of course, sharing biblical truth, sometimes people take offense regardless of how we deliver it. And that's true. I'd say that we can sometimes be doing it the most gracious way possible, and people still are bothered by it. So, I think that's something we want to kind of talk about.
I mean,
grace comes in.
The how you do it, I think, is just as important that you do it.
Yeah. Well, it comes down to the old adage,
Adage.
uh, that thing of, you can't control how other people will respond. You can only control what you do, right? And Karen says, I believe that people can disagree without hate, share the truth, pray, and then move on. Don't keep beating our opinions to death.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think later we want to talk about boundaries a little bit. So they'll kind of fit in with that.
Yeah. Because, I mean, so, we're seeing things where, we talk about some of these things are dividing families, but literally, like, this isn't just I'm just throwing a comment out there. Some of this stuff is literally driving a wedge between family members.
Yeah.
Whereby ultimatums are being given.
Yeah. Just another biblical thought I want to draw out before we I think we're getting some more comments, and I think we can kind of start getting more specific. But I just want to draw out that in the context of the early church, if you look through the New Testament letters, what you're going to find is the number one issue that they keep coming back to time and time again is unity in the church, or rather that they're writing to these different churches at different times, appealing to them to unify in love and grace for one another. And I actually find that kind of comforting, because it tells us that, we set the early church on such a pedestal, right? Like, man, they're close to Jesus. Like, within a few years, they had it going, right? If only we can get back to the early church. But the reality is that they struggled with disunity and infighting, and the rich taking advantage of the poor, and different ethnic and cultural boundaries, creating big gaps between people, breaking fellowship with people. Like, all those things were happening. And just a particular example, if you hop over to Romans 14 in particular, Paul is addressing this in the Roman church. He's talking to the church, which is Jewish and Gentile believers, who are dividing over whether or not it's right to worship God by following the Jewish cultural rituals that were wrapped up in the Old Covenant worship systems. And what Paul's calling them towards is love for one another. And that's a difficult thing. and I think they draw out how it's not an easy thing to do, but for the grace of God, right? But if you look at Romans 14 in verse 10, Paul says, "You then, why do you judge your brother or sister? Or why do you treat them with contempt? For we will all stand before God's judgment seat. It is written, as surely as I live, says the Lord, every knee will bow before me, every tongue will acknowledge God. So then, each of us will give an account of ourselves to God. And therefore, let's stop passing judgment on one another. Instead, make up your mind not to put any stumbling block or obstacle in the way of a brother or sister." And then he goes on to talk more about their specific issue. But I think that's a powerful thing to understand about the New Testament message, trying to draw us to unity that so much threatens to break us apart. But it is possible through Jesus that we actually can be united in spite of our differences. So
yeah. Well, and so even going back, you draw that out from the New Testament, but the example is even there in the Old Testament, right? The whole idea of Israel as one nation, this idea that they were supposed to dwell as God's chosen people, separate from the other nations, and the unity they were supposed to have with each other. In the law, the idea of the Sabbath year, right? The year of Jubilee, the forgiving of debts, the canceling of things that you owe me, the releasing of slaves, and the restoring of land back to its original owners every seventh year, and a year of rest. You know, or sorry, I think it was every 50th year was that year of canceling of all the debts and all that stuff, which was basically saying we there's a system built in where God was to bring them back to the same place again and again, where they're on equal footing with one another.
Yeah.
And then in the Psalms, Psalm 133, how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It's like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. It is as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion. For there the Lord bestows his blessing, even life forevermore.
Yeah.
God has made it very clear. And then carried over into the New Testament, with Jesus' prayer, that the priestly prayer in John 17 before he is betrayed and crucified, his prayer for the disciples and for the church was that unity, as Jesus is one with the Father, so we would be one with one another and one with him. Man alive, that's a high calling, but we can't do that in our own strength, right?
Yeah. And I think that's such a big part of the conversation about how we navigate these divisions going on, and the trying to apply God's wisdom to how we be followers of Jesus in the current circumstances of our world. Is that where was I going with that?
I don't know where you're going.
Well, I think just this thought that the point is, it is hard, but the question is, are we willing to apply the effort to be unified? And I mean, you read the Bible and the New Testament in particular, and anything Jesus says, the message is self-denial. It's dying to self. It's sacrificing for the sake of loving others, being a servant to all. That, and I think that's really the mindset we need to go into all this with, that even if we have a take on what's going on in these times and how we ought to respond, there's a way we can say, how can I not cause my brother to stumble? And how can I approach them in love, even though I don't agree with them? But we got a lot of comments now. I think maybe we should probably interact with them a bit.
I don't know if you can see the private chat and share that, Lance, because Shannon, like I said, is watching on YouTube and has been texting me.
Oh, yeah.
And so I've been putting them in there. I don't know if you can share that.
I can pull it up here in just a second. Okay, this is from Shannon watching. Perhaps we need to understand that unity doesn't always mean agreement. There are many points I disagree with from my wife, as an example of a person, but I stand with her always. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I use Shannon as a great example, because, I mean, Shannon has been my best friend for 25 years, maybe, and we maybe agree on 50% of stuff. But I mean, I got his back and he has mine. And I think we look at each other to see the heart with which we're coming at it. And we can sincerely disagree, but we sincerely care about each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Mary Moore, you were sharing divine grace, theological term present in many religions. It's been defined as divine influence, which operates in humans to regenerate and sanctify, to inspire virtuous impulses, and to impart strength to endure trial and resist temptation, and as an individual virtue or excellence of divine origin. Yeah, there's a lot of meat in that paragraph right there. Thank you, Mary. But yeah, it really is by God's grace and power that we do this, right?
Yeah.
If you're watching from the CFA community group, you will. We can't see your name unless you accept StreamYard. There should be a link in the post where you can give StreamYard permission, and then we can see your name and an image there. But so this person is saying the media and government is playing a big role in this as well. It's tough. It's tough to stay focused I think as to unify their
when
meetings.
when they encourage division.
Yeah, I
And
think
well,
there's
so
a lot of
yeah,
places.
I mean that's so. There's two things I say about that. One, I think that's true, and the reason being, it's about for the media, it's about viewers on the screen because that's how they make money, and for the government, this idea that the other side is the enemy, right? It doesn't matter which side you're on. The other side is the enemy,
Right.
because they want to get in power, and so the other side has to be an enemy. And I think we've lost the idea of responsible government, whereby and this isn't just Canada. This is the U.S. I would even say most democracies tend to degenerate into this because it's about them getting in power, and so it's not about saying, "Oh, wow, the Liberal Party actually has a really good idea here, and so we're going to amend what we're planning on doing because their idea is actually really good." You will never see NDP or Conservative say that about Liberals. You won't see Liberals say that about Conservative or NDP. It's just completely, our party has the right way. Every other party is the enemy. And so they do communicate that. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say to that is it's always been like that. You know, now media, sure, media is relatively new, but there's always been a clamoring for division because that's the flesh at work in the world. And it was in the early church between Jews and Gentiles. You know, it was at work then. It's still at work today. That spirit wants to bring division. This flesh wants to divide because it wants contrary to what God's spirit desires.
Yeah, and not just in these issues. It's division on racial lines, division on political lines, national lines.
Oh yeah,
division on, are you pro-Israel or pro-Palestine? If you want another hot button topic, like there's all these things, and yet the beautiful message of the gospel is that it's in spite of all those forces seeking to divide us, that in Jesus we're actually able to be one and unite as one. And that's why Jesus in his high priestly prayer at John 17, he talks about, us being one, just as he and the Father are one. And like that's the message to the world. What's he say? He says, I'm gonna pull it up. I need here it is. Jesus praying, my prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, his apostles, his disciples' message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me.
Yeah, and so the unity that Jesus is praying for, literally right now, is unity that I would be united with Lance. I would be united with Mary and Jessica and Karen. All the believers. The same as Jesus is one with the Father. That's the testimony to the world that God is at work.
Yeah,
and it is, because that's not natural.
Yeah.
That's not what we're seeing. And this is why I find it so disturbing, because we're seeing it in the church. That's the world. That's how the world operates. And Jesus has called us to something greater, but it's not going to happen out of our own strength.
Yeah.
There's no way that can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, it's a testimony of Jesus when the church stands united in love.
Yeah.
And I mean, unfortunately, it feels like we're not hitting that nail on the head at the moment in these circumstances. But just another thought you had brought up when we were chatting about this earlier, Steve, just regarding media, even that you had brought up, that the algorithms of your social media are designed to give you more of what you want and like to look at.
Yeah, I mean, social media has done that, and I mean, they make no excuses to doing that. They've done that it helps them monetize better. It helps you see more of what you actually are interested in. So ads for things that you're actually looking for. There's a reason why you're talking about dishwashers, and then all of a sudden your phone has ads about dishwashers, um, because you've allowed the permissions for your phone to listen and give it to you.
Yeah.
Um, and that's
And, like,
that's
lots
how
of
it
the
works.
times I really do want that.
Yeah,
Like
but
it, but it's not always good.
no, and we have to be aware that there's a confirmation bias that begins to happen because we see it, and so we see more of it, so we're convinced that all these things are true and right and whatever, and
Yeah.
and the rhetoric, like there's so much spin put on stuff because we want to be right.
Yeah.
You know, so you spin it a certain way so you can win the argument, not necessarily to win your brother, but to win the argument. And I've done it. I'm just as guilty. Shannon could probably tell you story of story. As we were younger, and the arguments we would have, and just the stupidity of things that I would do to try to prove a point instead of listen to be understood and to hear and all that kind of stuff. It was more about being right.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. No, good points. Here, let's take another thing. Oh, I think we're being asked, can we give our scriptures later? Yeah, totally. I think we can do that.
Yeah, we've made some notes of what scriptures we're going to share. So.
Karen brought up, keep our focus on scriptures, on Jesus, coming together in prayer. That should be our source. I think too many are turning to ungodly sources, cues, etc. Media. Yeah.
Hence what we're just talking about. That.
Yeah, exactly.
And so something I've been saying to people, and I don't know if people understand what I'm actually saying because I get blank looks when I say it. Get off social media for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Just try it.
See what happens to you.
Test and see what happens. You will not implode. You will not die if you try it. But if it's of no benefit, so what? You were just off social media for 6 months.
Yeah.
But I challenge you to see what happens with your thinking just by disconnecting from it.
Yeah.
Completely. Yeah. Not a little bit. Completely.
Yeah. Here's another thought. The Bible says that God put our leaders in their positions and we are to follow their authority. And many friends that are Christians follow this to a T, even if it goes against his word. So the question, how does one discuss this openly, and what are our thoughts as pastors with this? Whew. Yeah, it's a big one.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it depends on the specifics of the things. I mean, one of the specifics that I would say that we've seen, and it's the thing that's in the news, is the pastors being arrested as a sign of persecution against the church and a sign of coming against the church and not allowing them to meet and all that kind of stuff. Whoa, you just got invaded. So there's a spin even in that because yes, pastors are being arrested, but they're not being arrested for being pastors. They're not being arrested for preaching the gospel. They're being arrested because they're not following the guidelines of AHS and the Alberta government right now. Because is there anywhere else in Canada where they've been arrested, or is it just in Alberta?
I'm not sure.
Maybe Ontario, there was one. Maybe.
Again, my social media is designed to tell me only Alberta things and memes.
So that's happened, but charges have been laid against people who have had parties in their homes. Charges have been laid against rodeos. This isn't just churches that are being singled out and targeted. People who aren't following the guidelines are being singled out and targeted, right? I mean, that's what we see is happening. Again, you're seeing some of my perspective on this, but to say that where some churches would be following the rules of what the government is asking, how's it worded? Christians follow this to a T, even if it goes against his word. And so they would say you're going against his word because you're not meeting. And I would even challenge that. I would say, yeah, you can continue to meet. Right now, we can meet as many times as we want with 15 people coming to pray, uh, coming to gather. One of the big things that I've heard, is this idea of against the worship or singing, because it's hard to do that with 15 people or whatever, and even with the music and the masking and all that kind of stuff. But what worship is a part of what we see in Scripture. I'm not denying it's not, but worship is not just singing. We know that, but singing is a part of worship. I'm not denying that. But the thing that we see more often is the church, when it gathered, prayed, right?
Mhm.
I mean, that's very evident in the New Testament church.
Yeah.
And we are not being stopped from doing any of that. And even so the physical gathering together is being limited, but the church is not being targeted in that. Even though what I see online is the rhetoric that is being targeted, that's not the reality. It's anybody who's not following the guidelines is being targeted. And I mean, that's where I come down on that line. But to say, yeah, well, we're going to ignore this scripture because it's going against His word. I mean, that's one example where I've seen that argument has been played out, right?
Yeah. This is a powerful passage for me, and it's something I've been thinking about because there is that debate, like shouldn't we be gathering and singing and that's worship and that's really what God wants? But you know what? Then I turn to Isaiah and read Isaiah chapter 2, read Isaiah 58, and God's talking to an Israel who's going through the motions of the rituals in
Yep.
worship for Him, but their hearts aren't in it, and they're actually oppressive. They've become the oppressors, so here's Isaiah 58 verse 6. God saying, "Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood?" And I mean, what does that sound like? Something Jesus says later, right? Like, hey, you when you saw the poor and the naked and those in prison, and you visited them, and the sick, and you took care of them, you did it for me, right? And like, that's God's heart. That's worship in God's eyes. And I was really encouraged actually to read a story about a church that in following all the restrictions for their locality, did things like turned their church into a homeless shelter, so that there was more space for physical distance, people to have a place to stay, and they did food handouts and things like that. Like, there's many ways we can still be the church, and maybe it pushes us to be actually out there more creative in how we meet the needs of our location. So, I'm airing my heart there a little bit now too, but
yeah, and I mean, God is still at work. I mean, I met with a lady today who has been led to the Lord over this past 2 weeks by a fellow believer who's been meeting and had opportunity to lead her to the Lord. And so, I mean, God's still doing stuff. God is still at work, and I think there's an aspect where we can, and the idea of the divisiveness and this kind of stuff, it gets our eyes off of the things that are actually happening, probably, right? Because we're fixated on the things we see in the world, or the things that the disagreements. We're thinking more about trying to defend our position, or trying to prove the thing that we're saying is right. And even so, and I've done this, I'm confessing this, you tie your value to the opinion you hold on something. And then if you're proved to be wrong, well, now my value is lessened because I've believed this so deeply, and then it comes, oh, I'm actually wrong on that. Oh boy, you've I've tied my value to that.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably one area we've got to be a little cautious as we move, because it's hard to tie ourselves to anything but Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
and expect it's going to work out okay for us.
Yeah. So Karen said this regarding the pastors that were arrested. God doesn't need Christians to lie for him, nor would he ask them to. These pastors have turned the truths a bit, which tells that it might not be a godly calling. Sadly, it's showing the world a divided church.
Well, so what's interesting is I've heard a story recently. Corrie ten Boom, when she was, in the concentration camps and stuff, she had no problem lying to the Nazi officers, but her sister would not do it.
Mm.
And so Corrie ten Boom lied and felt she had a clear conscience to do that, and her sister would not lie and did not feel she had a clear conscience to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
God
that's interesting.
Yet God delivered them both.
Yeah. Well, and I'd say this, like we certainly can't speak to these pastors' calling. But I mean, I'll definitely say that, man, I hope there's room for me to make a mistake, as I perceive it, a mistake like that, and and I'd say that, and this is a hard thing about it, because I've even heard that there's some of these pastors that they're conducting themselves just, very appropriately as they stand for what they believe.
Yeah.
And I just disagree with the stance they're taking. But so that's, and I think that's partly why it's so hard to process these things and discuss them, because it's not so black and white. It's not so easy to define. But yeah, I mean, my take would be that I think that the thing these pastors are, the hill they're choosing to die on, so to speak, I would question if it's the value it really plays in building up the church and promoting the gospel.
Well, and the thing is, I mean, we can sit and we can make our statements on that, but we have our opinion and belief. And here's the thing, and I shared this with you today, which was just a profound thing that God dropped into my heart on Monday. The weird story in 1 Kings 13, right? Where God speaks to this prophet to go and to deliver this message. You can look it up, 1 Kings 13. God speaks to this prophet, go and deliver this message, this place, and then return home. And he goes and delivers this message, this guy approaches him, says, "Stay with me," and whatever. And he says, "No, Lord has told me to return home." And so he goes and starts to return home. And then another guy comes and says, "I was sent by the Lord to tell you to come stay with me." And so he says, "Oh, well, if the Lord told you to come stay with you, then I'll come stay with you." And then the Lord strikes this other prophet down because he says, I didn't tell you to do that. I told you to give the word and come home.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, but God, the other guy said that he heard from you and told him this. And I always found that one such a strange story. But as I was kind of praying on Monday, the Lord reminded me of this passage, this weird story. And he spoke to me so clearly as I'm meditating on that. Steve, you are only accountable to me. You're accountable to me. And so if I ask you to do something, you do it. And if I ask this other guy to do something different, doesn't matter. I've asked you to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be obedient to that. And I know, and that's the thing. Nobody else knows, but I know what the Lord has been speaking to me.
Right.
And I'm convinced I know it's the Lord that's been communicating things. And so I'm going to follow in obedience, because ultimately that's who I have to answer to.
Yeah.
And I don't want to come across as arrogant in that, because it's not an arrogance. It's a humble confidence. There's this humility that it's only him. It's not me. I wish I didn't have to do any of this stuff if it was up to me.
Yeah. Just a few comments. So Jessica mentioned Corey's sister died in the camp before they were delivered. Okay.
Well, maybe if she had lied to the guards.
We won't know now. Karen saying, just regarding the pastors, maybe I shouldn't judge so easy. Yeah, I agree. No, totally. Like it's so easy to,
I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, I can disagree with some of these pastors who have been arrested, but I've got to pray for them.
Yeah,
I've got to pray for them because they're still brothers in Christ.
Yeah, we had one more big question sort of here too. So knowing these things about social media, what is our church's stance on social media use, or is there one? Maybe it isn't appropriate to even have that kind of a stance as church. But what do you recommend as a way through that? Do you recommend not using social media at all? This is such a new thing for our generation, really, so it makes sense that we won't quite have the adequate boundaries in place yet. But it seems we are really seeing some of the downsides more than ever.
I would assume, yeah. So the church has no official stance on social media, and we're not going to take an official stance on social media because it's one of those things that we as individuals have to figure out, what is the Lord saying to me? But like I said, as a pastor, I'm willing to challenge people who feel they're in turmoil, and especially in the last year or so, why don't you experiment? Try it, disconnect from it. I've done many seasons of it over the last 10 years, and I keep coming back, and I don't know why. Oh, I do. So here's one of the reasons why. What we're doing right now, this is good. This is a good use of social media to be able to have some of these conversations and interact with these things. But I've got to be careful because I get trapped in that hole again and again and again, and spiraling, and it affects my thought. It affects my mind.
Yeah.
And I know it. I see it. I'm aware of it, which is why I'm quick to challenge people. Try it because I see it at work in me, and it takes one to know one kind of a thing.
Yeah. No, I think that's so true. It's just applying that wisdom. Like my wife, Danica, she loves having all these people she follows who believe things she really doesn't, because she loves to just know, like to see the other side, and so that doesn't bother her. And then I think another thing to wisdom in applying to social media is just knowing when adding your 2 cents is going to be fruitful to a conversation, and in a safe space to do that, and then also knowing when this is just like a trolling comment thread and you just choose not to engage, and that just takes wisdom. And so it's you do you figure out with Jesus what you need to do.
Amanda just sent me a text. Our official stance as a church, Ephesians 4:29, is do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Beautiful. Amen.
There you go. That'll preach. Yeah. So we are almost at an hour, Steve.
Wow. We eat that hour up.
Yeah. So we did have thoughts about like questions we would throw out to you guys to think about. I think we can do this in a little bit. Just a couple more comments here. Debbie agreeing, how to add our voice in a loving way. Karen saying personal thing, how we use like money could be for good or bad depending on how we choose. Love following the churches and Christian groups, totally. And Jessica loved the Ephesians passage, absolutely. And you're welcome, Mary. But yeah, I think we could take a few quick minutes, even if people don't answer, even if we don't spend a long time, but to have maybe Steve, we can just give some of our thoughts to these questions, and yeah, please feel free to answer them. But here's the first one: how has differences in opinion affected some of your relationships over the last few months? Has there been division and even like a breaking of relationship? And I know I've experienced that personally. It's breaking of relationships with people over these things.
I don't know if my mother's listening, but if she listens at some point,
Has she disowned you, Steve?
no, no. But I mean, we had a very heated conversation one night over some of this stuff, and I've I've been vocal to her about maybe you need to step back from social media for a bit. She doesn't take too kindly to those comments, but I will own. I probably am not as tactful with my mother as I would be with other people either.
Well, and here's the thing: is that, and I think this is why it hits harder with our loved ones, because they're closer to us and the stakes are higher. If some random person out there has a completely different stance on things than me, like I, at the end of the day, I'm not losing sleep over that. But if it were, my wife, my mom, my kid, and there's just such like heated division over these issues, like that's really rough, right?
Yeah.
Man, yeah, especially when it comes down to a perspective on like values and how we live as Christians, right? Like that's not like that's not light subject matter, and so the stakes are high, right? Yeah. Marcello, watching from Bolivia. Thanks for
Hey, Marcello.
time.
Marcello's like our fan.
He is the fan for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing this. In these hard times, we need to bring light and salt to the world. That's the goal. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. One morning show at night at a time. Something to reflect on. Just how relationships have been breaking over these things. And then the next question we wanted to kind of reflect on was, how can we have relationships with people we sincerely disagree with?
Yeah.
And that's tough.
It's tough, and I mean this idea that and what we're showing is the scriptures of unity, of love, and all these things. And I hope you would understand. We're calling you to that standard as pastors of the gospel. We're calling you to that standard, but we know you do not have the ability to do it. I don't have the ability to do it. Lance doesn't have the ability to do it. It's Christ in us, the hope of glory.
And I mean, man, I think that's why Jesus pushes so much the forgiving one another and stuff like that, because the anticipation is we're going to mess up as we try to follow Jesus, all of us. And so, man, to have that grace for each other. And I someone mentioned earlier but what if you're totally loving, but they're just not, and they're not interested, and you can't control that, and all you can do is love them and pray for them, and maybe it comes to the next point we're going to get to, which is about boundaries. But Ashley mentioned here, these things stress her out. I stopped following or reading about it. It just makes me mad to see what some people believe. I just try to love my neighbor and read about Jesus. That's probably good.
So there's something in that, Ashley, that I really appreciate. And this is why the social media thing, it's easy to get mad at a faceless. I don't know that person. I just see their handle. Yeah. Or maybe I do know that person, but it's just words on a screen. But when it's your neighbor that you see, that you interact with, that you get to know, that's a whole different story. That's putting flesh to the thing. And there's something about that I think as believers, it's easier to love that.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard,
Yeah. And I'd like to say this too. So obviously you can kind of sense where Steve and I are on what side of the fence we are on these issues. But I think it worth pointing out that while there's a big spectrum of reasons why people, I think, would take the stance of just opposed to government restrictions and open churches and get rid of the masks and like all those things is there's lots of reasons why people take that stance, but I think it worth pointing out that to have empathy for why people would maybe be in a position feeling those things. There is a lot of I think fear
Fear.
about
Yeah.
um,
Uncertainty.
fear and uncertainty about an infringement on rights, particularly for people who come from contexts or have loved ones in contexts where that's a pretty regular thing from the
Yeah.
government. Like that, I think there's that. For some of these people, it's that passion they have to um, be an advocate for our rights. So that we don't get to a place where they're being infringed, and like even when I disagree with maybe the stances they take, I can admire that heart to want to be an advocate for these things. For others, it's just seeing their livelihoods go down the tank, jobs
Mm.
lost, businesses crushed, and again, my heart, I would hope and believe that no one is looking at that with dispassion as we make tough decisions on how to navigate the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think ultimately we'll 10 years from now look back and be like, oh, here we did it okay. And those were decisions that maybe weren't good. But
I,
um,
I honestly, I mean, that's how history is judged.
yeah,
It's not
yeah.
judged while you're in it. It's judged after the fact.
Yeah. So I think part of us having love for people on an opposing side for us is trying to develop that empathy of just being like, okay, even though I disagree with you, and maybe how you're going about it, I can see some of where this is coming from. That it's not coming from
Yeah.
it's not the faceless person. It's a
Yeah.
real person with real fears and worries
Totally.
and yeah,
And let's be honest. I mean, as much as I may not be on the side of believing in the government overreach, and it's a thing where they're trying to take control or all that kind of stuff. I am not ignorant of the fact that the scripture shows us that that's how this thing is going to play out eventually. Um, and so, even if it is that, even if that's it, and I'm wrong, and it is that, I I am just loving people, and I am doing my best to try to dwell in unity, and
yeah,
that's what we're ultimately going to be judged in the end anyway.
yeah.
And if it is that, nothing we're going to do is going to stop it.
Yeah. And know this context of Jesus and the early church, um, man, a social economic system where you did not have power, like the idea of changing anything in your culture and society, it's not even on anyone's radar. Like it's just not a thing. We're very fortunate that we have rights and freedoms and the ability to vote and a sense that and man, like we could talk all day about the imbalances and injustices in even our system, but
Yeah,
there's a sense, man, the power we have to affect change in our society is way greater than they had in the early church. They didn't even have a context for it, but it was in that very system that Jesus said, "Love your enemy," and um, pray for those who persecute you, and be united as the church, and pray for your government and authorities. Pray for
yeah,
the crazy emperor who wants to blame torching parts of Rome on you and then crucify you. Pray for that guy. He
yeah,
could really use it. Just some other thoughts here, Jessica. In essentials,
yeah.
unity, and non-essentials, liberty, and all things charity. St. Augustine.
Love
Yeah,
that quote. Love
good
that
one.
quote.
Karen saying, I think healthy boundaries become important in our own growth.
Yep.
Totally. Sandra, love this conversation. It's about listening and respecting and then stepping back when I feel love leaving the room on my part of the. Yeah, I think that's good.
But and there's boundary. There's
Yeah, there's a
boundary in
boundary.
place. The boundary you set up, say when love leaves the room, I'm just going to step back.
Yeah.
That's not withdrawing me from your relationship with you. That's withdrawing me from this conversation for the time being.
Yeah. Yeah. Mary had the thought, she read an article, if this is the end times, then instead of fear and panic, the author felt that we should be rejoicing. Christ's coming.
Yep.
There's a perspective shift. Yeah.
Shannon had one from earlier that I put in the private chat. I thought was funny.
What is that?
Back when I said 50% of the time I'm wrong.
Oh, bold of you to admit that you are wrong up to 50% of the time.
I said 50% of the time we don't agree. He said bold of you to admit you're wrong 50% of the time.
So what are some healthy boundaries we can set up with each other to help maintain unity? So yeah, that being a really great one from Sandy of just choosing to step away in that moment. Yeah.
Choosing not to escalate and being clear that like this is where I am on this and we can disagree but I don't want this to continue to be the thing that we talk about or argue about. There's so much more to life. And I think when it gets to a place where you can't really talk about anything, how do you navigate that then?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and it might be, especially if it's loved ones, it might be a conversation of just, hey, we love each other so much. Let's not let this thing come between us. And so we're just going to agree to not, these are the topics that are not up for discussion when we visit or talk on the phone or whatever.
If it leads to heated.
If it leads to heated, yeah.
And that's the thing. So me and Shannon, when we were younger, I think we got heated. I think Shannon could testify to, well, maybe I was wrong then too.
Who won those arguments?
Oh, he did every time. That's the reason he's a lawyer,
Perfect.
But he might have won the argument, but he still didn't convince me. but I think as time evolved, we've learned to have the conversation, to have the back and forth, and maybe we don't see eye to eye, but it's more about I'm listening to understand why is it you see that way, why is it I see this way, and at the end of the day, he maybe he has swayed me in some things, maybe I've swayed him. I would hope that's what's happened, but
I saw, I don't know where I saw this. I think it was from a book I was reading, but it was the thought of, it's one thing to love because of things, like because we see eye to eye, but it's another thing to love in spite of things. To wholly throw yourself in love towards a person in spite of the fact that you can't stand their stance on something. Like what a sign of love, right? Yeah. This is from Kelsey. I don't know how everyone else manages it, but when I came back onto social media a few years ago, I created a fairly strict agreement for myself, boundaries that she's written down. I have to wait a certain amount of time before I allow myself to respond to comments so that I am listening even longer for conflict issues. I have a timer for only a certain amount each day, certain days off, this kind of thing. Yeah, that's really cool.
Can I just say something for Kelsey?
Yeah.
I so appreciate your social media presence. The things you put on Instagram, man alive, it blesses my spirit. And so I can testify that these things that you've put into practice are of great value to what you're putting out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Kelsey. Yeah, and a great thought too, just choosing to take time to think and pray and before responding. Yeah, that definitely helps, especially if you feel yourself getting heated about this stuff, right? And yeah, I don't know. Any other boundaries you can think of, Steve?
I'm sure. So there's a book I can recommend
Oh,
uh, by Henry Cloud, and I'm pretty sure it's actually Boundaries in a Digital Age.
hmm,
I'll look it up while you continue to go on to the next question.
sure. Well, that was the last question, actually.
Oh, okay.
So, but definitely comment more. People watch this later as well. People will come back around to read the comments. But yeah, we share some of those thoughts. How do you navigate these difficult conversations? Because I think that's what people need encouragement with. And yeah, I think those are some good boundaries, right? That we kind of discussed so far.
So,
Um,
so it's in their book Boundaries. There's a chapter,
yeah,
but here's a video where they specifically talk about boundaries in a digital age, which could
cool.
be very helpful, and some of that stuff. Uh, but their book on boundaries, man alive, such great insight. I highly recommend.
Kelsey. I need to go back and see what they post. That's great. Oh, you got the
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll throw this up. Link you guys can follow. I don't know if you can. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. You can take a picture of it. Maybe you can't click on it. I don't think, but you could take a picture. Just pause and type that in. But anywho, yeah. You're saying, Steve?
No, I mean the scriptures are full of things of so we're if it's causing harm, it's toxic. A healthy boundary is to set a distance and to say our relationship can't be like this, and to have that conversation. If it's in a family or a friend or someone that your coworker or whatever, to have that we can't. This is not healthy.
Yeah.
Whatever this becomes, and so to even have that dialogue to say, how do we make this healthy? And if they're not willing to make it healthy, then the appropriate boundary is to say, if you're not willing to help make this relationship healthy, then I have to pull back a little bit. The loving thing for me to do is to pull back. Anyway,
yeah.
Cloud and Townsend's book on boundaries has some phenomenal stuff on those things. And a Christian, these guys are Christian people, right? Writing from that viewpoint. So
that's awesome. Just want to share Marcello's comment, and then I'll have you close with your one thought. See, but
yeah,
Marcello is just saying, just a thing learned about how to deal with people like that. Hear them. Sometimes it's just a matter of patience. Keep quiet. 1 Corinthians 11:16. But if anyone wants to argue about this, I simply say that we have no other custom than this. Neither do God's other churches. We have the freedom to talk about what is the truth, but certainly we don't have the power to change people. That's the Holy Spirit. So just need to ask for wisdom about that in those circumstances. Yeah. Good thought.
Well, and another thing that, as I'm reading Marcello's comment there, that came to me, and I'll bring this out in my last point.
We are going to close this. We're wrapping it up.
We're wrapping it up. So last night in our freedom session, Ken made a statement in there, and he's not talking about any of this stuff. This came at us another thing, but when he said it, it was like, whoa, that is so powerful, and that's so. I mean, it's right on in regards to what we're going to talk about tonight. He talked about the spiritual battle that's taking place, and the spiritual battle is not between God and the devil. That's what we tend to think is going on, but it's not. That battle was won at the cross, done. Actually, that's not even true. The battle between God and the devil was won even before any of that, when he threw Satan out, and boom, in a half a second, it's done. Satan's cast out; he's cast down. But even the battle between Satan and us, that's done at the cross. It is finished. Jesus has brought victory over sin and death at the cross. But the battle's still going on, and the battle is this. The battle is over who gets glory. Who gets glory? Satan is just out to rob God of all the glory that's due him.
Right.
And he doesn't care. He doesn't care who gets glory as long as God doesn't get glory.
Right.
That's what he's out to do. And so the battle now, and this idea of the flesh and the spirit that's kind of in us, and so even that is over who's going to get the glory. And when you see the deeds of the flesh are evident, who gets glory when the deeds of the flesh are evident? I get glory. Somebody else gets some glory.
Yeah.
You get some glory, maybe some systems or whatever, they get glory, but not God. He doesn't get glory when the flesh is at work. And so there's this aspect that I think, in when we're entering into some of these things, who's getting the glory right now? Who's getting the glory? And if it's not Jesus elevating the Father, then that's what am I doing?
Yeah.
What am I doing?
Yeah.
And just that idea of how that plays out in this concept of unity. Who gets glory when we're dwelling together in unity? God gets glory. Just Jesus prayed. He receives the glory when we're dwelling together in unity. And when the flesh is at work, it's typically for my glory. Look how, the mic drop. Who gets glory at that? I did. I just got glory. Look at how people celebrate. Oh, that is a profound statement.
Yeah.
But not God.
Yeah.
Very rarely is it God getting the glory in those moments. And that hit me because I've had a lot of those conversations where it was about me getting glory and not the Father.
Yeah.
And honestly, that is where we need to be as the church.
Yeah. No, that's a really great thought.
Yeah. And so going along with what Marcello said, the spirit by which we approach this, guess what? I could be wrong in my opinions. I could have the wrong opinion. I might be looking at this totally wrong. But if it's not about my glory, oh well, I was wrong. But if it's about the Father's glory, he's going to get glory. Even if my opinion was wrong, he's going to get glory if it's really about his glory.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess in a way it comes around to this thought that God doesn't really need us to defend him. God doesn't need us to
preach it,
fight for his rights. Or and just this, I think there's that trust that comes from believing that when Jesus says, man, love one another, that's how the world will know you're my disciples, if you love one another. To trust that maybe he knows what he's talking about, that in a time where it seems crazy to love and to be gracious and to just be at peace in a time like this.
Yeah.
But by the power of Christ in us, man, maybe it is what he says, where if we do it, it really does show the world that we are his followers, and it's a testimony, and it gives glory to God. So, no, thanks for sharing that, Steve.
Yeah, well, thanks to Ken Dick for sharing it at a Freedom Session.
Yes,
which
thank you, Ken.
Fit perfectly.
And thank you all for bearing with us for an hour and 20 minutes, hearing us.
You people are the real stars in this.
Yeah, that's right. These are the people who said, you know what I should do with my Wednesday evening is listen to Lance and Steve talk for an hour and a half. What a great idea.
We love you for it. We love you for it.
Yeah. Thank you. Please feel free to comment more, share this with people. We hope it has been encouragement. We see some of you commenting appreciation for the discussion, and I mean, yeah, we're not experts, and we just wanted to try and bring just some of our pastoral thoughts to the situation. And we hope that you, feel God's presence and help as you seek to navigate these times with us. So,
and bring glory to Him. I hope that's the goal. If you can go out tomorrow and bring glory to Him,
yeah,
it was worth it.
yeah, totally. Kelsey's asking, how do you share this video, this live stream, to people who aren't in the online group? Actually, if you just go to either our YouTube, CFA YouTube channel, or our CFA Facebook page, you can share. There's a post with the video there. You can share it. So, all right, take care, everyone. Good night, and stay safe.
Lance and Stephen in the morning is still going ahead tomorrow morning.
That's right.
We're still going to do it.
If this has not been enough of us for you, 10:30 tomorrow morning, we will be invading the airwaves near you.
And we have guests. We have guests tomorrow morning. It's going to be fun.
It'll be fun. Tomorrow will be lighthearted, we promise. So,
and
right.
30 minutes or less.
Yes, for sure. Not an hour and a half. All right. Good night.
Good night. Yeah.